Hello, everyone. Come on, you're too tired. Hello, everyone. Good. I understand that you've been very busy, and it shows on your faces. But that's a good sign. I love busy people. And it's great to see all of you again. It's great to be back in Medellin. It's great to see that the show is growing from strength to strength. And as you can see, we've upgraded. Look around you, the studio has changed. We have fancy lights for you, fancy carpet to keep you cozy and warm. But we have an extended show for you today. And I think that to get straight to the point, in this show will be quite different. What we want to do now is to hear what those discussions that went on after my show had ended look like. And I understand that you were able to rally yourself around groups and some decisions have been made, some agreements have been made. We love to hear agreements. And so today, there are roughly 10 groups. Wow, 10 groups. And you'll be talking about reframing risk, urban agriculture, housing policy framework, so that's the order in which you'll be coming, housing rights and human rights, participatory planning, radical feminism. I've been told to check my eyes, you know. I should go to Specsavers. It's a free advert for them. Media Alliance, green entrepreneurship, and informal workers groups. There's two of you. So we're going to go straight into that. I'm interested. I'm quite curious to see what kinds of agreements you've made, and it's a great lesson for our viewers at home. For those of you at home, still keep tweeting in. I'm not sure we'll have the time for the tweets today, but I do read them every single time. As usual, I have some guests. Because it's an expanded show, we've gone a bit up, a notch higher with the kind of guests that we have today. And I'm going to invite them very quickly up. For the first guest, he's a renowned academic in a very large institution where I visited very recently. Actually, today, I just got back from London. I visited University College London, and I met with him, and he was on my flight as well. And he's a professor of urban and human and sustainable, and he's a professor of everything, actually. He's got many hats, and please help me invite Professor Yacobi, professor of everything from University College London. Yes, please have a seat. And my next guest has also flown in. Actually, she never really lands. She's always in between flights. And she lives in airports and suitcases. So she's here in transit, and she's agreed to be on my show. And she's coming all the way from the United Nations. Yeah, wow. So her name is Liani Farah. And she's the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate. You know, the UN guys have 2 lines for their addresses. The longer it is, the more important you are. So the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. Please welcome him. Thank you. And final guest I have today. I met him when I first visited Cape Town. He was visiting from Johannesburg, where was his base. And he does a lot of work. I follow his tweets on Twitter. You know, he's trying to compete who gets more followers, but he knows who's won already, and you know who's the man of the day. But he works for a large organization called Civicus, and they have representation in over 175 countries. You know, speaking for the voiceless, working with many civil society organizations, and it's my pleasure to invite the Secretary General of Civicus, Mr. Kumi Naidu. Thank you.
What a pleasure.
Thank you for coming, Kumi. Hope the flight was okay?
It was good, thanks. Nice to see your new studio.
Yeah, well, lovely. We're investing hard.
Yeah. Last time I saw you at the World Urban Forum, it was slightly lower.
Oh, it's lower.
So the ratings must be good?
Ratings are very good. I hear Sky wants to add us to one of their channels. I'm not too sure about Sky, but yes. Maybe Virgin. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great panel. Please put your hands together for my panel. So, To go straight to the point, as I said, we've been through 3 parts of the city in Medellin. We've been through Cominocho, we've been through Naranjal, we've been through the Innovation District. We've seen how development could be a good thing, but has issues for different constituents and different groups. And you've been talking, you've been deciding and negotiating things. I'm curious to hear the agreements. So I'm going to invite you, because we've spent a lot on this studio, we need to be quick, because the airtime is getting more and more expensive. So we have 4 minutes of a quick, straight to the point presentation. Go straight to the agreements, go straight to the heart of the matter. And the panelists here would respond to the agreements and give you their opinions, their insights, their views. And so I would like you to kindly stick to time. And without further ado, the first group is Reframing Risk. As they are presenting, I'm going to mention the next 2 groups so you can get yourselves ready. Urban Agriculture, you're going to be next, followed by Housing Policy Framework. So we are starting with Reframing Risk. So with a round of applause, let's hear from you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So we worked also on the reframing of knowledge within risk. So our project and our agreement is called MAP Medellin, and mainly our purpose is to create democratic knowledge co-production to put into practice environmental and social justice by the creation of a map of risks. The principles that we thought are the most important are principle of transparency that have to be carried out also by media, trying to get to an efficient policy making, trying to listen to multiple voices within the city, trying to understand the sources and the causes of risks itself, and trying to create a community ownership in order that everyone that lives in Medellin can understand what the risks are.
Sorry, say.
Good afternoon. As a state, we must facilitate a multi-stakeholder dialogue to ensure the purpose is achieved. And we are responsible and accountable for making sure that funding and policy are implemented and actors comply with the policies.
As a private sector, we'd like to make use of localized sources, including human, labor, without exploitation. Also the provision of expertise. We will provide technology and our resources to enable knowledge co-production.
The academic representation of the civil society, actually the whole of civil society, our role and responsibility is to advocate for the voices of the community so they're represented within processes, and academics specifically to facilitate research tools using participatory mapping capability through Remap Risk.
Yeah, and also as a part of the civil society, we see that we have to act like a function, like a bridge, you know, in terms of in the knowledge of co-production process to ensure effects policies. Yeah.
And as a representative of the dwellers, we want our responsibility is to kind of participate in this process quite actively, and also make sure that the materials are disseminated and communicated in ways that are digestible for the community and for every member of the community.
And so the last point is obviously about time, because time is precious. These changements would take us, we think, around 6 months. We would like to do an informative campaign at the beginning to engage the community, and a training session to make more awareness of how the software and this Remap Risk software will be used, and to make it user-friendly, obviously, because this is important. We would like to make some practical workshops and field trips within all the 3 different communities of Naranjal. And then we will come up with a map of risks on this software. And obviously, after the map of risks is produced, we can get to the negotiation part with all the stakeholders we mentioned. So states, civil society, dwellers, and private sector must all be involved with a progressive state that is at the
all sounded too good to be true, actually. And I love the timeline, but I'm no expert of remap risk or disasters, not at all. I do only studio work. And so I'm going to ask my very good friend, I know you're very passionate about these issues. What did you think about this presentation?
Well, that was a great presentation.
Okay.
I thought that they really captured a lot of energy there, particularly from the community groups. You know, I'm more interested in where civil society is coming from. So I think it's a very nice idea to bring people around, to engage people in the city around the notion of risk, and to start to create new ways in which people can start to come together around risk. I have some questions which your presentation raised, which was are all risks mappable? And surely there are different interests in risk. So some people are able to make a living out of risk and would want risks to be, or the consequences of risks to be there. So how would you deal with that if some people are invested in actually making sure those risks are sustained? And then some people need or embrace risk. So the risk means that living in that place means that the costs are lower. So they want to be in places where, well, they not want to be, but it's functional to them. So I wonder how you would deal with that. But I really like the energy, particularly coming from civil society. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with my colleague. I think it was a wonderful presentation, very insightful. And I think it's very important to start to see how these coalitions can start responding to challenges that we as part of the UN have been working on elaborate collectively. I don't know how aware you are about the whole SDGs framework and the amount of different challenges that as a humanity we are facing the next few years. And I really like the way in which you, through a very specific entry point that is risk, are managing to touch many other things. No? Are managing to touch issues of housing, even if you don't mention it directly, are managing to touch issues of community strength, of sustainability, of dealing with climate change, and maybe consideration will be to speak to those frameworks more explicitly, because the question is not just how do you produce those maps, but I think that's something that you have addressed very clearly in terms of co-production and involving different actors, but also who those maps are talking to, and how do you engage a wider audience that actually can take those maps in a way that, for instance, that doesn't strengthen possibilities of eviction, doesn't violates rights in one way or another. Like information is not neutral, no? The way information is used. So that's just a comment to think about, but congratulations, it was a very interesting input.
Yeah, I think I will go with the same line. I think it's a great idea to discuss knowledge and knowledge production as a platform for development, for mapping risk, etc., etc. But I think I have two questions that you don't have to answer, okay? The first one has to do with what happens when knowledge is under dispute. Because as my colleague said here, knowledge is not so neutral. So I think this is, something that you should think about. The other issue and it has to do also with the timeline that you mentioned, which sounds so unrealistic. So, and it has to do maybe with the third point, how people will refer to your ideas when you come, with a very nice project, but with very non-realistic timeline.
Thank you very much. I think that was a good presentation. I think these questions, I don't know if you're taking notes or you have colleagues who are taking notes of them. Just so a mental note of them. So I hope that's a realistic note. So take a good note of them and think about them. Think about the different scales of risk as well. Because I did a course on risk as well once. And I understand that risk are on different scales. So probably you need to capture the scale and nature of risk. And possibly also think about, a lot of these work sometimes it's a snapshot in time. But risk accumulates or changes over. How are you going to account for changes over time? And not just a very elaborate, useful exercise that shows us what was the situation for that particular moment. but well done. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the next group, and it's urban agriculture. As they come up, please note the housing policy your next. Okay? So please, a round of applause for urban agriculture. Urban agriculture.
Small group.
Wow. It's a very small group for agriculture. Are you going to feed them? Okay. Do you need a microphone?
Yes, thank you. So we, good afternoon everybody. We represent a group of dwellers, state members, civil society organizations, and the state who have been trying to figure out what we can do, what sort of intervention we could do in Comuna 8 around a 1 acre plot of land which is nearby the Greenbelt. And it's an area which is affected by potential risks. So we got together a number of us, from different groups across the neighborhoods of the city. And what we agreed is that we would like to pilot an agricultural urban project that, through the establishment of a learning and knowledge hub, is going to help Medellin, and that's our anticipation, our assumption, become a model city for innovative approaches towards agro-urban economy. So we want to, starting from a 1 acre plot of land in Comuna 8, put the necessary resources, financial, human, and academic, towards helping us understand what will take to turn Medellin into a city which is known globally as an innovation for agricultural businesses. And these are the principles that this model is based on, this approach is based on.
One very strong principle is that it is co-designed by the different actors that were mentioned before. So we do want to keep everybody, to give everybody a voice, to hear everybody. And the next thing that is really important, and that's also something that we already stressed, is the production of knowledge, which is intrinsically linked to it being research-based. We want universities to be involved. We want this to be a pilot, and that can be then seen whether or not it can be found. And the next point is skill development. That's more on the communal level, so that's where the community gets involved and where also the youth of the community can be trained and get knowledge about agricultural production. What other big interests are, like on a more material side, if you want, is that it would increase the food security for the local communities, which is, I believe, very important. But also on a greater scale for the city, would reduce the risk of landslides, because we know that agriculture, especially if we talk about forestry, it can really have a great impact on the environmental risks. And that is a projection for the future. Eventually, it might even be a brand for agrotourism.
Okay, so regarding the roles and responsibilities of these different actors that are working together towards this project, first of all, as dwellers, like in the Comuna 8, we have like really important and strong groups of women agriculture groups and also waste management groups. So the idea is to involve this community and the people that want to get involved. To first of all work the land. The land is going to be given and leased by the state. So we can work it, we can manage it, and we can also like participate in the research, and we can, the idea is to engage with the academia, so we can give also like some workshops to students and also citizens that are interested.
You have 30 seconds left. Yes, as a state, we're gonna lease the land for 50 years to that community. We're gonna fund the necessary communication infrastructure to take the products out of that particular land, market them into the city. My colleague will talk about that. We'll also co-fund the infrastructure development necessary to actually do the real work, some consumables, some housing, some warehousing, some of the seeds that need to be used. And then we go to the project.
For the private sector, it's more of a corporate responsibility, if you want to put it that way. So we will take produce because it's organic and we can market it very interestingly as local or organic food that will be used in hotels. And for this asset in our marketing, we will co-fund on the infrastructure.
Thank you. And then last but not least, civil society and academia, they're going to be leading the research. Academia is going to be the main partner on doing the research, and the civil society is going to help with the advocacy for on those issues for national, local, and international impact.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shall I turn to POE, Professor of Everything?
Thank you very much. I think it was an excellent presentation. And I really liked it because it was so detailed, and we thought about the different aspects of the project. But I have two questions. One is a very big question. What will be considered as a success? Okay? Because I could think about different ways to evaluate the results of your pilot project, and so I was wondering if you thought about it. The other issue has to do with a very sensitive social aspect of your project. Who will be the first people or communities that will participate, that will take part in this project? What will be the criteria through which you will select the people or the community? Because it sounds and looks so promising that I'm sure that many people will have a serious fight about it.
Thank you, Professor Chaim. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very, very interesting and very insightful. Something that I really rescue about your proposal, and I think is something that also could have been mentioned for the previous one, is the fact that you are drawing on existing networks and existing things that are happening. That I think any kind of initiative that wants to tackle problems in the city that doesn't recognize those existing activities is like, there's no way that it can be successful. So the fact that you are drawing on existing networks of women, for instance, doing agriculture, I think that's kind of the seed for an initiative like this to be successful, because it's not just like on an empty space. My only question will be, and probably it draws on what Chaim was saying about this more conflicted nature, is that urban agriculture deals with urban land. And urban land is always a contested issue. So even if I know you have the state on your side and saying that they are willing to give some land for this purpose, we know that land is always contested, and there will always be needs about housing, and there will be always needs from the market, and that's something just to put a lot of attention, because it's not just like one variable, but a key variable for a project like this. But thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll join my colleagues. That was a nice presentation. I like the fact that you're bringing things around food as something that touches everybody in the city. So that's a very smart thing to be doing. I also have a question about the land. Specifically the productivity of the land. Because you're thinking about using that land to grow stuff or keep animals or have fish or chickens or whatever you're going to do. And that's going to come up against other land uses, which will have to be then justified. Well, if we can get a crop from the rural area at half the price, what's the point of doing it in the city? And so that function will fall away unless you have a very strong rationale for why you should continue with urban agriculture. So I think that would be something to work on. How could you defend urban agriculture against claims of the productivity of other things? And so one of the things I think that you could think about
30 seconds.
Is problematic is the things like water and irrigation. So even if you move out of this plot, where would there be continued water and fertilizer? So, but I think that's an exciting idea. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Do you have that buzzer or not?
No, I think you should, yes.
Food for thoughts.
It's food for thought, actually.
Then the right question.
The product of urban agriculture. Yes. Thank you. We're going to move on, and we have housing policy framework, but as they get ready, remember that housing rights, you're next. So housing policy framework, please come up, and then housing rights and human rights, please get ready for the next. Yeah. There you go. There you go.
So
Is it working?
Okay. So we started looking at how we can do something to control a speculative housing market and ensure that we have the ability to give all of the people in the city access to adequate housing. And that kind of covers all ages, all the people who have different circumstances, who have different needs from housing. So to really, I guess, tackle the issue, we kind of came at it from two places. One is around how do you manage the speculation and how do you manage the increasing price of land and property, and the other is more of a supply side point, which is how do you increase the housing stock, increase the variety of options available to people. So in terms of solutions and actions, we focus on two. Obviously, it's an incredibly complex issue that won't be solved with just two policies, but time. So the first one was around a progressive taxation system designed to discourage speculation. So a number of different proposals here. A tax on undeveloped land, and a sort of lose it or use it right in terms of planning permission. Tax on the kind of uplift or the sort of land value tax, and tax on owning second homes. Ideally, we'd use that to then fund some of the second proposal, which is establishing a community land trust. So, in terms of the community land trust, there's a number of different issues, but probably the most difficult one to deal with is how do you get land? So, how do you have land to actually establish it? What we were proposing is to transfer land from the state that is currently under state ownership. Within the legal setup, have a right to purchase, so a community right to purchase, a first refusal, and then also a right of eminent domain on the proviso that, say, the state housing minister signs off on it, and it's in line with the master plan for the city.
You have 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. Just to a couple of points just in terms of governance, so it would be managed by a combination of members of the trust, the local community, and the state, and experts from planning and other technical experts. I would also look to have a kind of mixed use or mixed structure where you have both rights to build on specific plots. You would then, if you were selling it, sell it back to the community land trust, but also in some situations a requirement to build social housing, which would then form a rental income, potentially mixed-use developments as well, where there'd be a kind of business rate to try and keep that the land trust more sustainable.
I like the way you speak. I should hire you. Well done. But so quick response. I understand that some of you have questions or would like to respond to some of the feedback. There will be a short Q&A section, intermittent, I'll announce it, where you can give feedback or responses or comments, and so wait for that session. So we'll have the quick comments from the panel once again, go on for 2 more presentations, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important that groups, some of these agreements are really trying to tackle to the kind of hard issues. Like, of course, it's difficult to tackle things when there's this magnitude of problem. We know that this is a problem that is not just present in the city of Medellin, but most cities in the world have issues in terms of dealing with speculation and increasing the stock of housing. So the first thing is to kind of congratulate you to deal with the hard stuff that I know is always hard. My comment will be that it's important though to qualify that hard stuff, because it's not just housing, it's adequate housing. It's not just increasing the stock, it's increasing the stock in an inclusive, in a safe, in a manner that actually responds to needs, that is not just about navigating the market, but ensuring that the different actors, including the market, are providing housing that actually are responding to the needs of the citizens. So I would just be careful on the way in which this hard discussion is not empty of those values that should be at the core if you want to work with the community. And in the same way, is in a city like Medellin, we know that all these more, if you want, formal ways of engaging with housing, through taxation, through official land tenure systems, etc., need to be in conversation with other ways of producing housing that are happening in the city anyway. Part of the city is produced through processes that are informal, that are outside the law, and it's not just that, it doesn't mean that we don't need to do anything about it, but we should recognize them as part of the stock of housing that is being produced, of the speculation of land that is happening. So it is to put that into the conversation and not divide it as if it was a different universe that housing policies doesn't need to talk to. But thank you very much.
I just want to add something. I really appreciate the fact that you deal with a very sensitive, politically sensitive issue, i.e. housing. And I was thinking that your idea of transferring land to the state is very bright but very naive. Because some countries that they have like 97% of state land, it doesn't mean that housing distribution is equal and just. So what I miss is your ideas about how to integrate into policy-making processes some more legal and normative components that will ensure, that housing will be distributed in a just way and not, like if I'll give my land to the state and I'll see that nothing get out of it, I'll be a bit disappointed.
Yeah, I have very similar feedback. It's wow, trying to tackle this topic in 4 minutes. That's a very impressive in 4 minutes. I think that there are questions about the underlying property rights system that you'd have to address, because clearly the property rights system that exists at the moment is part of the problem. And so similar to Hein, I would say that that's a key issue. And what I missed is, probably because it's 4 minutes and 10 seconds, is how the speculation is arising in Medellin at the moment. What are those drivers of speculation? Because if we understand what those drivers are, we get a clearer sense of how you might address them through this policy. But very well done.
Thank you. Well done. So, quite related to that, we want to hear something on housing rights and human rights. Housing rights and human rights. And as soon as they're done, we would like to hear on participatory planning, which was really at the heart of almost all the discussions we had in the show. So participatory planning, please get ready, and then we'll have the break.
So we were discussing about housing rights and how it affects the human rights, and we started to think about solutions. I think the main purpose of thinking about housing rights and human rights is how they are connected with the concept of right to the city, and how we can promote it. So we thought about like increasing the participation of the social community, also to promote that participatory process. And we thought about some solutions. So we thought about maybe creating an evaluation body that must be made independent from like state structures and also private sector interests. We thought about this idea that it's kind of an adverse right to own the land after a person stay a long period there. And also for people that talking about specifically
that doesn't want to stay there, we may create like a housing loan to compensate them. So the phases, we thought about like give affordable period to them to leave, and with
Yes, you have 1 minute.
Well, yes, maybe return to the main idea of how housing rights are human rights, actually. So how to build from there. And maybe our main goal is to give to the dwellers in the community enough tools to be capable to negotiate with the same level with the government and the private sector. And one of those tools is information about the value of the land and their houses. So in case of inevitable evictions, they can sit in the table with information so they can have more power to negotiate for the future.
Thank you. So on housing rights and human rights, what do you think, Islam? Yeah.
I think, like the other groups, you're not shy of tackling big issues, especially in 4 minutes. So I have 2 questions to you. I think the one is, how is housing rights, how are housing rights an issue at the moment? Because if we understand how they're an issue, we might understand what we need to do about them. The other one is, what happens when you move, let's say you're successful, what happens when you move the discourses and the processes and the actions into a rights discourse? Who is empowered and who loses in the process of that movement into a rights discourse? And I think there are big questions from other parts of the world that we learned about moving into a rights discourse, moving into courts, moving into judicial frameworks. And it's not always inevitable that, or automatic, that people who are disempowered get empowered through that process. But well done on not being scared to go for the big one. Great.
Okay, well, I can echo what Colin was. What's the name of that Colin?
Kumi. Not Colin.
Not Colin. I don't know who Colin is. Kumi was saying about dealing with big issues, no, and the right to housing and human rights and the right to the city are big issues, and one of the main struggles that many organizations all over the world, particularly Latin America, are facing are how to operationalize those frameworks. How do we move not just from a list of ideas of what right to the city is and what housing rights are, but how to operationalize that? What does it mean? So I think it's a very good effort to move in that direction. But it will be important, I guess, for you, if you want to think in the next step, to start like qualifying that definition. Or like in the UN, for instance, the framework that the right to adequate housing is using is this idea of housing is a right, not a commodity. So it's in that position in which the idea of right comes from. It comes from the idea of it's not a commodity, it's a right. And that's a way to go. But if that's the way in which you want to operationalize it, then to make it explicit in order to get all these actors involved in the process will be essential, I think. Or any other framework that you want to use. But I think that's kind of the next step.
Thank you very much. I liked very much the idea of discussing housing in relation to human rights. And I would like to try and to push you a bit more, because I think that the right to housing is the basic right that enables other rights. For example, the right to health, the right to education, the right to employment. So I think it would be very interesting idea to develop a bit further. Yeah, well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done. That's it. You want more time? You've got to pay. I think that the idea of housing and human rights is a derivative. This is a good one. We're going to take participatory planning. Are there community residents here from all the 3 communities? Can I see your hand? All the community residents? You're awfully quiet today. What's happening? Any community residents say, yeah? No. Okay. You're here?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We're involved.
You're involved?
Yeah.
I was getting a bit worried, actually. So we want to hear on participatory planning, which was really at the heart of your discussions. Yes.
Hello everyone. So I'm from the City of Medellin, but I'm here with all my other active groups. As Mami said, that participatory planning was really at the heart of what people were trying to do or said they were trying to do. But we really wanted to go back to the drawing board after a hard few days of negotiation, because we often, I know many people thought that it wasn't really happening properly. So in that vein, we've been trying to build up trust and commitment and really embed participation into a framework for planning. So we've got as our purpose and principles, we want to create a co-produced vision for a sustainable living with structured representation, and that's really what we're going for, something that every active group can get on board with from the beginning that we've made together. And secondly, we want it to be a framework and a process of accountability. This is also about building up trust, and we want it to be almost a self-regulating framework where everyone's involved, everyone can keep an eye on each other and really build that commitment to creating something together. And the third principle that we want to work by is flexible, long-term engagement of all actors. So we didn't want to just create a principle that could become out of date. We wanted to be really responsive to changing conditions, changes in society, basically allowing for resilience. So all our actors are committed to being flexible, being open to new initiatives. And fourthly, we want to embed the recognition and active fulfillment of human rights into the planning process. And that's by all engaging together. We can go beyond saying that we care about human rights to actually implementing them and making sure they're upheld.
1 minute.
Oh no, sorry.
So the actions that we thought of were to establish a council to represent different scales of engagement, where people can, from different stages, the different stakeholders can come together and talk about things. Similarly, we to manage conflict of interest, like the state has different ideas, like other people have different ideas, so they can all get together. The third one was to design a citizen charter, where everyone can give their opinion on what they want. And the fourth one was to facilitate representation, to actually tell people how important it is to represent themselves or the society, and to actually give out their ideas. And lastly, the commitment to Medellin's social and environmental and cultural heritage, so that the private sector can actually take into consideration these ideas and not just do whatever they want to do.
And I'm Tess, I'm from the Dwellers, so we have been very involved in this process. And I just want to quickly run you through the basic framework that we have for phases. Let me say from the beginning that this will be a multi-year process, but the beauty in it is that the process of building this is actually an execution of ideas. So first of all, this involves all of the agreements that have come before us. We're going to co-produce data, mapping, risk assessment, mapping of stakeholders. So this involves all of you, so that we can all go through this process and participate together. Next we go on to evaluation and findings and proposal of pilot project where we can test out what we found and what we think might work. And after that, get feedback in an open forum so people can express what the challenges were, what the opportunities were. And then into the formation of our participatory framework, which is under constant evaluation. Let me exaggerate, that is under constant evaluation. And there will be constant opportunity for feedback as well. So we want to keep this as flexible as possible.
So quick comments, yes?
Very quick. Thank you very much for the presentation. I really enjoy the way in which you put a lot of emphasis on the principles, because I think in an issue as participatory planning, if you manage to have a whole a kind of set of stakeholders to agree on those 4 principles, I think that's kind of an action by itself. And I think they were very nicely phrased and very nicely put. The idea of co-production, accountability, that is something that is hard to talk about and so important when we talk about planning and participation, the long-term engagement and recognition. So that's my first comment. I think the principles by itself is a project somehow in your presentation, and I really like that. My comment will be We know that planning tools and planning instruments are very limited, and many times, many of these things, they clash against that wall. And I think in that sense, like a next step will be to think about how these principles and these commitments can talk to a system, a bureaucratic system that's very, many times is the main problem somehow. Rather than facilitating the process of planning, and it ends up interrupting it. And it's not that, it doesn't mean that we need to bypass it, but we need to think how to talk to that system. So that would be, I guess, the next step.
I'll be very short. I think that one of the issues that you should think about, that it's a very dangerous field, talking about participatory planning, and it's very political, it's very sensitive, and I was wondering if you thought about a situation that things will not work, that there will be no agreement or there will be a conflict. So I cannot see from distance. Manage conflict of interest. So I think it's too general.
Conflict is another sense of
I like that. There are some very smart ideas there, and I like the way that you're trying to bring things together. Two key issues that came up for me that I was wondering about while you spoke is, the one is what incentive there is for people to participate. Why would they be there? So, for example, you might tie it to participatory budgeting or those kinds of processes where people participate in order to have a budget to plan something in their neighborhood or whatever it is. But I think you were trying to get there with the scale idea, which is a good point. And the other question which came up, which your presentation stimulated for me, was how you maintain that balance between, and it links to my colleague from the UN's point, whose name I don't remember. But,
you can call me Camila. It's my
oh, that's why I couldn't remember.
That's why.
The point is that how do you maintain the balance between institutionalizing something and allowing participation to happen? And that's a really tricky thing to have to grapple with, and your presentation made me think of that, how you would do that. But thank you very much.
Are there any very quick burning comments, questions, contributions? I understand there are a few other experts in the house as well. Any quick contributions? You've got 40 seconds each per contribution there are. Any responses, any questions, any comments? Anybody wants to have a go? 40 seconds. Yeah.
If I can give.
If I can hear more about this, what do you mean?
Any other comments or questions? That's a question. Comments or responses? Okay. Right.
I think it had to do with the group that discussed the mapping of risks, if I remember correctly. So I think some risks are very tangible and obvious, but some are very much they depend very much on the way in which a specific community perceive a risk in relation to some other options. Okay, so we might find a situation that a group of people would prefer to live in a space or a territory that we will consider as very risky area, while the other options are even worse. So what I think is that the definition of risk is also highly political, and I just I was wondering what can we do, because according to our knowledge as experts, sometimes we think, this is a place that people shouldn't live, or okay.
Okay, so I see there was a quick final one, and he's moved to the front. So 40 seconds.
Thank you. I'll take the opportunity to reply because I wanted to do it on the first instance. As a state that I was representing,
Can you stand up for the camera,
yeah.
please? Yes.
I acknowledge that mapping, as you mentioned, mappings can be read differently. And in risk assessment, I consider that it should be seen as mapping as a pedagogical tool, in the sense that when you live in a risk area surrounded by hazards, mapping is almost important as the capability to read. So in terms of democratic production of knowledge, I believe that the state is responsible for empowering the civil society and the dwellers to be able to not only read the maps of the area where they live in, but also to be able to participate in the production of their own space. So in that sense, I think that mapping is power. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to move on with the show and the presentations. I've got two very quick apologies to off the record, actually. I remember that as typical fashion of Spotlight, we used to give all the participants a nice hot meal, actually, before the show, with some cheese and biscuits and stuff. But with the new studio, our kitchen is not ready, so unfortunately the food will not come today. So I'm going to give you a quick 5 minutes break. If you need to use the loos are outside there. Please don't go beyond the lobby. If you want teas and coffees, you can get something quick in the lobby as well. You need to post your receipts to Spotlight and Medellin PNB, and we will give you a reimbursement. Yes, but 5 very quick minutes, or chat with somebody around. Get to know somebody. Say hello to somebody in the community. But 5 very quick minutes break, and then we'll continue. Thank you. So we'll continue with our interesting outcomes and presentations of all the outcomes. I hope you've all had some refreshments, coffee. Don't forget to post your receipts to the show, and then we'll deal with them. If you didn't get anything, please, I've got a special jug of water here. You can have some. It's good for you as well. So moving on, I'm going to quickly announce the next 3 so that you can prepare yourself in that succession. The next group will be Green Entrepreneurship, followed by Radical Feminist Manifesto, and then a Media Alliance. So Green Entrepreneurship, can you please get ready looking for it? And then Radical Feminist Manifesto, get ready after that. And then followed by the Media Alliance.
Okay, so we were the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Group, and there were 2 representatives from the private sector, 3 from state, or 2 from the city council, 1 from Ruta N, and 1 civil society group. And our main agreement was to use entrepreneurship and innovation as drivers of an equitable, prosperous, and environmentally sustainable Medellin. So this is our purpose, and these 3 keywords, equitable, prosperous, and environmentally sustainable, those are the principles on which we aim to achieve this agreement. And we actually came up with 1 action as part of this 10-year agreement, which the city councilman is going to
So, in terms of looking at projects being incredible, obviously eco-friendly and sustainable, we wanted to use the technology that we are going to, as a part of the development process, and the technology that's used by startup companies, in order to incentivize and empower local businesses that somehow, that at the moment use practices that might be polluting, that might be inefficient, to streamline the services and make them more efficient and more green. I'll give you a brief example. So, in the province of Chagala, you have multiple businesses operating small cafeteria, shops, eateries, and they want to sell their products to businesses, and every day make multiple delivery runs. And there are also taxi services in the city. They also make multiple runs with their clients. So we, for example, we introduced an app where we bring these stakeholders together and we eliminate redundant business trips by saying, okay, while you're running with your client, you can also transport goods from one place to another. So you basically reduce the carbon footprint, reduce one trip from your daily journey, and as a result, the sum total of the process is much more greener. So that's one of the ways in which we use this technology to make things more efficient and therefore more green.
Have 1 minute.
Okay, and what we failed to mention is that we're actually going to create a startup accelerator. That's like our main action. And this is one of the actions that's part of this 10-year agreement. So for our phases, there's like 2 phases to take into account. One is a 10-year agreement. So the startup accelerator would be one of the projects within that agreement. We didn't think beyond that project for now. But as far as implementing or like creating the startup accelerator, there would need to be some research and development into where we would put this and who is interested in it, and then reach out to the local community to see what kind of ideas there are, and then actually start the actual accelerator program.
Good. It's fine.
Yeah.
Sure? Okay. All right. Any comments on that? Would you like to take the lead?
Yeah, I think that's great that you're embracing the market and thinking about market mechanisms to engage in developmental processes. I think so often the market is left out as this big area that can't be touched and shouldn't be engaged with, and it's basically something that's going to just overrun everything. But I think it's very important to be engaging with the market and thinking what market processes, what kinds of engagement people have with markets that would allow progress to be made. So that's, that said, I think that there are 2 issues your presentation raised for me. The one is that the example that you gave kind of eradicates somebody's livelihood. And I wonder how you balance, because your presentation raises the question, how do you balance someone finding and making a livelihood in exactly those gaps and those disjunctures in the economy? I mean, that's how people engage in entrepreneurship. They find gaps, they find disjunctures. So why do you want to take those disjunctures away? What about the livelihoods that people have there? So I think if you push this forward, you have to think about how you reduce those problems. And then the second thing is this the most important place to start thinking about green entrepreneurship, or is it the big corporations that are massively polluting rivers or pumping out, using lots of energy in production? So those are the 2 questions that that very nice presentation raised for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that it's nice and refreshing to see presentations that are dealing with issues that we don't always engage with, as for instance the use of technology. Many times we see the discussions about technologies in cities and smart cities as happening somewhere else that doesn't have anything to do with the discussions about justice and development. And I think it's a duty for us to engage with those conversations in order not to make that conversation to happen somewhere else. No? So that's my first comment. I think it's very nice. I agree completely with Colin about, I think similarly to what we were discussing before about knowledge and information and mapping, technology can be used to either challenge or reinforce injustices and inequalities and all the segregation patterns and vulnerabilities that we see in a city as Medellin. So it's always we need to approach it very, very aware of those limitations and very aware to ask ourselves to what extent, for instance, discourse based on issues of efficiency may be damaging other people's livelihoods, as Colin was pointing out. So it's always with these kind of things, I think we need to be extra attentive about those things.
Just one small comment or question. I was wondering, how will you convince people to participate or join your initiative? I mean, what I was missing here is also a kind of attitude or approach towards, I would call it education in the widest sense of what education is. How you convince people or how you change their awareness in order to convince them to participate in what you suggest here. So, yeah.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much.
So, we're moving on. I was quite excited to hear this one, actually. It's a radical feminist manifesto.
Finally.
Finally. Let's hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Magnus. We must say that the only radical thing about our manifesto that we brought is a radical positive change for all the people that is in this room. So we must say that. So we brought a manifesto, and so the first question is, what does social justice mean for all of us? We have talked about it. So from our point of view is removing oppression, violence, and discrimination against all marginalized genders.
And second is empowerment is collective, not individual. Like for example, my father runs formal car repair shop in Nanhai. He sent me to Seoul to do master in urban planning. So I'm empowered as an individual, but when I came back to my community in Colombia, like I couldn't fight back to system and culture is already there. So if you just empower individual women or children or citizens, it cannot beat with bigger society and system, which is not justice. And then the third is reflection of diverse groups throughout society in politics, media, civil society, and everything, with specific attention to women and LGBTIQ groups. Yeah. For example, I'm half Colombian, half Korean, so I'm interracial. And hola, I don't know. And also I'm not married and I don't have children. So as a single woman, there's no policy and planning considering me. And my good friend Karen, she's transgender, but like there's no planning or policy considering her, because yeah, it's not really inclusive. So, and in the way how we are reflecting this diverse group, we don't want any tokenism. Like we want at least 50% of panels or just to be women or representing gender, which we are kind of seeing a little bit of but yeah, no one should be background or token for mainstream. That's what we are suggesting.
And also, we have heard a lot about knowledge production. So we have a question, and is whose knowledge are we going to reproduce? Whose knowledge are we going to represent? So what we have here is that we have history, we have identity, we have cultural heritage, we have emotions behind this, all the social groups that are involved in this community. So we pledge for local knowledge as important as expert knowledge.
So just to answer the question that all of you are no doubt thinking, why on earth is am I standing up here in a radical feminist and that is because this, and to build upon my colleagues' comments at the start, this actually isn't radical. This is something that the men in the room should not be afraid of. In fact, embrace. All this is doing is seeking to establish basic principles of equality in our society and culture. Now, how do we do that? How do we create the conditions of equality? We've come up with a number of different particular things that need to be done. I won't go through all of them, but things such as universal infrastructure. So too often, as we were discussing in our group, too often our cities designed by men and for men. It's thinking, it's embedding women and other forms of gender within the urban planning process. It's ensuring safety for all forms of gender, our young women growing up in these cities. And finally, I would like to say that it's actually securing access to work. Just because you go and have a baby doesn't mean that you should give up your right to work and your right to, and your ability to work. You should be able to return to work and it should be progressive. Finally, I would say that we touched upon media already, but mass media and communication needs to open up and reflect the diversity in our culture. And that's something I would put to the media group up for right now. Thank you.
I would give you. I already gave you 1 more minute because I have a bias.
There's one last thing that we haven't talked about explicitly, and it's prostitution and sexual tourism. That is in Colombia and in Medellin. So we have to take that into account when we talk about gender and human rights.
Thank you very much. Once again.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
No question.
No comments. No. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very refreshing, and I think everyone here appreciates that the fact that you took the risk of like thinking outside the box of like the idea of the task that you were given, and like bring about like so many important issues. I personally think that the discussion of equality, especially the discussion about urban inequality, has to do with the discussion about feminism, because it's not just about gender, and I think you put some emphasis on gender, but I really like the way in which you phrase the thing about marginality and about diversity, because when we talk about gender, we are not talking just about the rights of women, the rights of girls, we are talking about how infrastructure, services, institutions, the government, organizations, the market is responsible to provide a good quality of life for everyone, regardless of their origins, regardless of their class, and of course their gender. And for me, a word that I think needs to emerge from this is like, how do we build those solidarities? How do we build those coalitions that are not just based on the individual principles that each of the actors that have been brought about today have, but how do we found those bonds of solidarity that are not based on specific identities, but are based on the diversity and the base of the marginalities that are present in the city of Medellin. So thank you for your presentation. No more questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to raise a small issue that has to do, I think, looking at urban space in relation to gender, or the way in which different people, women, men, transgenders are using space is one level of the discussion. I think that the real revolution should come from the education to planning, architecture, and development. So I was wondering to what extent you took it into account to your proposal.
Okay.
Yeah, I think congratulations on dealing with a really important topic. It's long overdue. This kind of issue comes in. It's hard to fault you on that. But the one issue that I felt is that, and maybe this is just because it's 4 minutes, is that it's very hard to understand what you'd actually do. You know? All of the comments that you made, all of the ideas you have are fantastic, but what would they mean in practice? And clearly that would be something to take forward, because each one of them is, as Camilla's particularly pointing out, within that diversity and gender identities overlapping with all kinds of other ones. How do those intersections actually mean that gender is the issue step forward? But well done.
Can I one more thing? Yes. Yeah, I think another issue that you raised that I think is very important is how do we use this radical feminist manifesto as a way to approach knowledge, and I think that can be a bridge to the comment that Colin was making about how do we operationalize, if you want, this in urban planning and in the particular fate of the communities that are participating of this negotiation, in starting by recognizing those different kind of knowledges, and then we can think of very specific and concrete ways to move in that direction. And for me, doing that, starting from the standpoint of a feminist approach, is an enormous first step. So yeah, maybe that address a little bit of that.
Thank you very, very much. I think very interesting. I love a copy of this manifesto. I'm reviewing my recruitment policy actually, and so I'm going to. I will make sure that all my panels are very well balanced and very well represented. And I've learned a lot actually. Thank you very much.
We have a policy suggestions as well on our website. So
on your website. So up next, and then after this will be the informal workers coalition. But up next is the people who are very close to me actually, the Media Alliance. Media Alliance. They are already putting the radical feminist agenda in practice.
Okay, so we came together with different media representatives from different stakeholder groups. Unfortunately, the state was not present, but we are hoping that they will see the value in our media and communication strategy that we are trying to develop at a city level. So the main purpose and main principles will be that we would like to promote and ensure transparency in different processes, and we would also like to produce trustworthy and accessible information, ensuring that quality is valued more than quantity of information. And the actions and roles and responsibilities that we have defined can be divided into two different things. So one is that we want to develop a communication code of conduct, in which, for example, coming from the Feminist Manifesto, we could maybe talk about diversity and how to include different voices. And we would also like to define processes of consent. So, like, for example, how we will want to talk more about how people that are presented, how do they have to agree to whatever, however they are presented, whatever. So we want to talk about these things in different steps with all the stakeholders.
And the other process is more about the community. So we want the community to produce their stories themselves. So we want to do a process of participatory video photography. So the private sector, and we hope the states will give funding, equipment, cameras, and the space. So the civil society can do workshops with the community to teach them how to use these cameras and these videos, and then the community can go and produce their own stories. Then, after 4 months or maybe 6 months, because there should be like some things we cannot plan. So after 6 months, we receive all these new stories, all this material, and we hope with the state we can do a festival that then is going to be yearly of showing the stories of the community. And another thing, so for the first process of developing the communication code of conduct, we want to create a steering committee from all the actors. This committee is going to select some people that are going to be in different workshops. There are going to be a series of workshops because we know only one workshop, we cannot gather all the voices of the different sectors, so we're going to do different workshops. After every workshop, we have to do a report that is accessible, so the person that participated in the workshops can go to each sector to show them what happened in the workshop, to see who else is going to participate in the second. We're hoping this to be accomplished in 2 years. We have, or maybe more. We have to secure the funds and have the state on board with this. And that's it.
Professor of everything, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I can say, yeah.
I know you're a professor of media as well, of urban media.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
I don't have a TV at home, and so no. But I think you're discussing something which is very serious. It's about the democratization of a sphere which is very much in the hands of those who have power, usually. So I think your idea. I mean, I wish it will. I mean, I'm very sympathetic. But I was wondering, for example, what those in power will say about it. Because, it's a very subversive act of producing knowledge of, at attracting attention, giving people voice. How do you think you will deal with it politically?
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree. It's very nice to hear, very concrete, and that's also very nice to do with it. And very timely, because we know that nowadays the issues about media, and the production of knowledge and production of information and communication are absolutely key. And in that respect, I think there are two issues that came to my mind. For me, on the one hand, the issue of the communication code of conduct and consent and all those things that you're saying, they all have to do with ethics of communication. And I think, especially in Latin America, especially this week in Latin America, we know the power that the media may have in wider political processes and the importance of having media that is behaving under ethical conduct. So I think that's crucial. I will also comment, like, now, how do we have those spaces to talk to those who already have the power? Mm. And on the other hand, the thing that is about producing stories and, like, kind of grounding, the production of media, I think it's beautiful, it's wonderful. My only concern is that we cannot do that romanticizing it and not, forgetting that there are issues of accountability that also apply when you decentralize the production of media. So if we want to have a media that is ethical, a media that is actually, I hate the term fake news, so I think there are lies, a media that is not saying lies and that is responsible and takes part on wider processes, we need to make sure that it's accountable at any level, and we need to make sure that we don't romanticize any kind of production of information.
Yeah, a nice initiative here. I like what you're trying to do. I think that the focus on ethics is really important, and I don't need to pick up on that because both my colleagues have done that. So that's really important. The one issue that came up for me was how you deal with all the fragmentation of media. So all the different outlets, and how you would try and I don't know whether you even want consistency, but how you try and have some coherence across all the different ways in which media plays out at the moment. Because I think that would be somehow important, but I can't see how you do it. So that raises a really tricky issue, what you're proposing. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think that's an interesting presentation with lots of interesting feedback for you to reflect on. Well done. We're running out of time, and we have two very final presentations. So two very quick presentations, and they are two halves or two sides of the same coin. So we're going to have presentations on informal workers or informality and workers in the city, but one will talk about high-level participation or high-level influence. I think they will explain better when they come. And then the second group will talk more about local actors in that informal workers coalitions. So the first one is the high level. Okay? Sorry? Did I get the terminology right? So there is a high level group on informal workers coalition. And I'd like to hear you first. Can you please come? Are you not sure who's high and who's low? We are the lowest. Okay, so the low is in front, the high is behind. Yes, let's come.
Okay, so we developed a strategy to face with the...
What do you mean by high level? Start with that first.
Well, let's say that's the concept that we did bring to the table, that we mean on a micro strategy to face local economic development in the three areas that have been described.
So that's the high level.
It means without borders.
Oh.
No.
Please continue.
No, it doesn't.
I just wanted to understand the distinction between the two groups, that's all.
Okay, so we've been working on a strategy to deal with local economic development in the three areas. And this is a strategy that wants starts with local baseline studies to assess, to identify local assets in the communities, and to work towards promoting local economy from that assets. And so this is a strategy developed between the Inter-American Development Bank, the state, and some universities. And so we're going to now present two of the strategies that we've been working in, and we haven't closed the one on so the idea is to promote local development through baseline studies and development loans. So the structure works that the Inter-American Development Bank gives both a grant and a loan to the state. Grant that is that aims to develop baseline studies of local assets to identify needs and local economic opportunities in cooperation with, in the case of the Innovation District, the University of Antioquia, and so the idea is that this grant necessarily goes along with a loan to the state to developing to giving them resources for buying land to develop community centers and give skill training for local economic development.
1 minute.
Perhaps one of you can listen
In the case of the innovation district, what we got in negotiation with the IDB was that with the grant in the University of Antioquia that is inside the innovation district, we will educate and give more skills to the local workers that are in the district right now. So we avoid the eviction of all of the locals that are there right now, because obviously what the smart city and the innovation district is kind of a complicated thing. But also with the grant that they will, with the loan, we will try to buy land that we need in order to build along with the private sector, developing new buildings. In this, the method is we have a percentage of the new building and the private sector keeps another percentage. With the percentage that we have, we will try to regulate the rents so they can be affordable for the local workers and for the new startups in order that they can stay inside the innovation district. And we can make affordable working space, housing, and local commerce.
Yep, no time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the high-level presentation. So just to clarify, you spoke on behalf of what representative of
Inter-American Development Bank.
Inter-American Development Bank, and you were a state as well. Okay. Right. Thank you. Any comments on that?
I think it was nice that you're working. You've thought through the issues. Right? That you need a loan, you need land, you need a centre, you need to think about the long-term sustainability. So that was very clear. Very nice to see that you engage with all of those different levels. The question that comes to my mind is what would inform this skills training that you're imagining? What would it be for? How would you devise it? Why would people want it? What would they do with it? How would it relate to other kinds of skills training that might exist on the job or wherever? So, a couple of questions around that. But I really like the way you thought through things at different levels as well.
Yeah, thank you. I will follow in the same line. I agree. I think your focus on building these high level or macro strategy partnerships is very important, and many times most of the efforts of government officials, of NGOs are so much focused on actually getting those partnerships and getting those resources. So the fact that you thought through them, I think is very relevant. Now the question will be, what do we do with those resources and how do we make the use of those resources as meaningful as possible? Like somehow, I think the opportunity that emerges from this space in which you have so many actors will be like to try to match, that you have the state and the Inter-American Development Bank with some particular ambitions and with some particular goals, and you can find I'm sure there will be overlaps with more rounded organizations that can then get use of those resources, and I think that will be kind of similar to a comment that I made earlier about the housing. It's like, how do you qualify those more quantitative things? Like you have, okay, we got the resources, we got the commitment of these organizations, but what kind of training are we providing? Like, what kind of spaces are we providing? How are we ensuring that those partnerships are actually triggering processes that go beyond this high level? So I think that's kind of how we move forward from that step.
Thank you.
That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have let's put your hands together for them. Thank you. We're going to have our final presentation. It's also looking at informal workers, but from a perspective they call the low level. So I would like that clarification and distinction. What do you mean by low level, and then continue the presentation?
We did.
Phrase it like that.
Okay. Well, continue the presentation.
Okay. So we were from Nanhan, so we're representing the informal sector, more of the car repair services and the waste management. And we were able to make agreements within the private sector and the public sector. So our purpose and our main principles were to provide job security and new forms of employment, to protect the livelihoods and cultural integrity of our workers, to foster relationships between the different sectors and actors, and to secure participation of the more vulnerable actors. So our actions, the way that we were going to make this possible was by a state community contract for the informal waste management sector, and setting up a union in the waste management sector, which would be responsible for healthcare training and building on local knowledge and self-organized capability building. And the state would also give us the opportunity for the informal workers to formalize if they desire to do so. And then for the car repair workers, there was going to be relocation to Caracol, which they agreed upon. And due to this, the state was going to provide an electric bus service between Nanhan and Caracol. And another thing was that the private sector was going to provide a new facility for the formal waste management. So the phases were, number one, setting up a union, which would take between 1 to 2 years. This would be by securing funding and the participation between the public and private actors. And then for the car repair businesses, we wanted things to be able to be done within 1 year, so the relocation, but the bus service was going to last for 3 years, and that was going to be state provided.
Just to add that this was one of the main bottlenecks during Windsor, during the negotiations, and it was hard actually. I think there's a really important symbolic value of actually having an agreement with the private sector, government, and informal workers to actually manage this situation. And it was hard during this process, and I think we found common ground, and I think that's a really important thing.
Thank you very, very much. So, final comments on this engagement with informal workers. My good friend in transit, I understand you have a flight soon. So
I'm going to Nairobi.
You're going to Nairobi? Oh. Quick one.
Well, thank you very much. I think, as you say at the end, this is for sure one of the hot issues in a city like Medellin. And the entry point of waste management, I think, it touches at least two different things. One has to do with the informal workers, that by itself is a whole universe to deal with. And the other one, the issue of waste, that in most cities is an enormous issue. It's an issue that many times is invisible to all of us, we just take our bags, leave them back, and forget about it. But it's an issue of city management that is enormous. So I think that overlap of those issues, taking it as an important one, is very valuable. Now, my question will be, and I like actually the way you phrase it. I think is you are already answering part of the question, but is the current system working? Because many times we have this tendency to kind of wanting to formalize things because we think that, but to what extent does the current system of waste management, so-called informal, is actually taking care of the responsibility? And I think one of the main things that maybe you have done already in your discussions, and this is just food for thoughts, is to identify where are the spaces of actually improvement. It's about job security, it's about people putting at risk their health while doing these jobs, it's about making sure that they are in communication with the state. But just with any time we engage with these kind of informal systems, to start asking the question, what needs to be improved? Because it's not just about formalizing as a way to make them look like just to fit within a system that works. That's my general comment.
I just want to, add something, or maybe to take it another step, because I'm not so sure that formalizing is, this solution.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the very question is, who will gain what out of formalizing, this kind of informal workers? Is it something that, I think maybe you've said it and I didn't listen because I cannot read it from here. But for example, what kind of, I would say, social and political process will accompany your action in order to negotiate or to understand what are the real needs of these workers?
So yeah, I thought I like the way that you discussed the whole range of issues. So from security to relationships to participation. I like that breadth. But I had similar thoughts in my mind as you were talking about how you would engage with the huge and very important and very critical power imbalances in the waste management sector, particularly at the level that you're talking about, because it's not homogeneous, it's not, as you know. So how you do that, I'd be really interested to hear and see where you could take that. Well done.
Thank you very much. I think that we've had a very interesting last few days with the presentations, the negotiations, the issues that are happening in Medellin that you don't hear in the major headlines, but at the drill down level, you need to understand that development is not always homogeneous and it brings about issues. I think you need to appreciate my panel once again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we're going to be taking their seats. I've got one more thing to show you, but hold on for now. So my very good friend, Mr. Kuminaidu, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, can you appreciate it? And my friend from the UN, I understand you have a flight. Have a safe journey. We hope to see you once again. Thank you very much for all the excitement. Professor of everything from the University College London. Thank you very much. I think that after this, we will promote him to Professor Emeritus of everything. All the insightful comments. I think that Spotlight on Medellin, I have an announcement. We'll be taking a bit of a break because when I went to London, I got a little bit engaged in academia and I decided to spend more time in school. And so I will be staying with the University College London a little bit. And we're recruiting for a replacement for the show. So viewers at home, if you're interested, please send your application. Before we wrap up this grand edition, I need to say thank you to the people that you don't often see. They are behind the scenes. My camera team is fantastic. Put your hands together for them. Alex. And the man who organizes everything, my manager, my producer, and he's actually hiding. So Ricardo. And the stage manager extraordinaire, Alessio, thank you very much. And the executive producer, who looks very much like my Shakira as well, yes. Thank you very much, Catalina. So, my final thanks to everyone for watching, thanks for following, thanks for all the tweets, all the comments. I've got some very lovely feedback from all of you, thank you very much. 2 minutes or more, something to show you to leave, and you've been wonderful. Who knows, it's a very small world. We may bump into each other once again. Have a good evening.